Good morning and welcome to our National Donor Sabbath webinar, Purpose in Pain, Charity and Love Through Donation. I'm Dr. Janice F. Whaley, President and CEO of Donor Network West and Donor Network West Foundation. Today we gather with a sense of purpose and gratitude, joined by remarkable faith and spiritual leaders from diverse communities who are here to share their wisdom on organ, eye, and tissue donation. This event is a testament to the power of faith and the compassion that fuels the act of giving, the gift of life. National Donor Sabbath invites faith-based communities to come together to elevate the conversation around organ, eye, and tissue donation. Faith has a deeply personal meaning for each of us. It shapes our decisions, guides our actions, and provides strength in time of uncertainty. For those awaiting a life-saving organ transplant, faith can be both a source of hope and a guiding light, illuminating the path towards healing and renewal. Today, we are privileged to hear from faith leaders who will share how their spiritual teachings intersects with the call to donate and save lives. Their voices inspire us to see donation as an act of love, compassion, and unity that transcends differences and connects us all in our shared community. Together, let us honor the spirit of National Donor Sabbath. In faith and unity, we stand with those who wait and support the message of organ, eye, and tissue donation. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and thank you to our faith-based leaders for sharing their invaluable perspective on the sacred gift of life. Let us now take a moment of silence to honor the generous individuals who have chosen to give the gift of life through donation, and to remember those who have passed while awaiting a life-saving transplant. Thank you. Please join me now in welcoming our panelists, along with our moderator, Jacqueline Manzanito, Senior Director of Donation Development.
Thank you, Janice. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm honored to be with this panel and get to know them a little bit better alongside of all of you here with us today, as well as out there in the virtual space. It's a real pleasure and honor. I'd like to start off our time together with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land where we're gathered today, the traditional land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. We would like to also acknowledge the Presidio Chapel, the beautiful Presidio Chapel, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. It was built in 1931 by the U.S. Army, and it honors the legacy of serving all faiths and now functions as a center for interfaith worship, hosting events and community gatherings overlooking San Francisco Bay. Its Spanish colonial revival architecture features arched stained glass windows, which I hope you'll get a picture of, the fresco and redwood beamed ceilings. We thank the Interfaith Center at the Presidio and Reverend Gerald Caprio for welcoming us to this sacred space that fosters peace and celebrates the spiritual diversity of the Bay Area. Before we share a bit of a beginning prayer for all of us today, I just want to frame for you the number of people nationally that are waiting for an organ transplant. It's the real intersection to me of faith and hope that all of us together are having this conversation. There are many, many people waiting for that gift of life and really dependent on these important conversations happening. And in California, we have about a fifth of the wait list here for those folks who are waiting for a transplant. And so our call to action is great, and we take that very seriously at Donor Network West. And that's why we collect today to have a conversation with leaders who you might be looking to in your own lives for guidance and conversation about this important topic. To me, it's just a real intersection of the good we can do to each other for humanity's sake. So we will start with a wonderful prayer by Reverend Ted Nemi. He's joining us on a recorded session today. He is a Donor Network West ambassador. He's a liver recipient and has been an active ambassador with us since his transplant in 2015 at UCSF. He joins the Donor Sabbath as a Connect to Purpose speaker to talk about his connection to faith and donation. Although he couldn't be here in person, he will be opening up with a prayer and sharing his story. Ed?
Let's pray. Dear Creator God, we thank you for your presence with us now. May this Donor Sabbath be a blessing to all. We wait and we pray for those who are waiting in the shadow of pain and suffering, in the shadow of disease and mortality. May their wait end soon with the donation of a healthy organ, a successful transplant, and a speedy recovery. We pray that you would send your Holy Spirit upon men and women that they may be moved to share their health by giving blood and committing themselves to organ donation. We pray that the hearts of families would be blessed, those who are facing the death of a loved one, that in the shadow of grief, they may find the strength to give the gift of life to others. In your holy name we pray. Hi, my name is Ted Nemi, and I'm the pastor at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Fresno. And not only is the Donor Sabbath meaningful personally to me as a man of faith, but also I am a transplant recipient. In 2014, I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me that I was going to need to have a transplant. So I got on the list and the wait started. I waited about 8 months until I got a call from a family member who told me that there was a friend from college who just had a left-hand side brain hemorrhage, and it looked like he was going to be donating his organs. So my people called their people, and it turned out that we were both the same blood type and that the transplant was on. So my surgeons from UCSF sent out a private jet to go get the organ from Minnesota. It came back, and on February 5th, 2015, I received a new liver. It's absolutely life-changing, and it's a blessing beyond description. I have dedicated my life since to spreading this word, and so I thank you for your participation in this Donor Sabbath. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor Ted. He is from my hometown, Fresno, California, but the Bay, of course, is my second home after having been with Donor Network for 20 years. So this is my first privilege to be a part of our Donor Sabbath. And with this esteemed group of folks today, so I'm going to try to be the talk show hostess with the mostest and have a meaningful conversation today to illuminate some faith areas that many of us have maybe not been exposed to. And so certainly we're always encouraging more conversation about organ donation, and anything we can do to create that space in the faith community, I think, is really important. Historically, we celebrate donors. It was historically celebrated in November and created by the Donate Life coalition in the U.S., and then has kind of been adopted by all of the different agencies in each state that support organ donation and transplantation, and it's become really something that we do all year long. It's not just a November event anymore. It's something that we really want to embrace at all times because our faith stays with us through all those times as well. So as we begin our first conversation, I'd like to introduce everyone to Dr. Reverend Rodney Leggett. He is the senior pastor at Cornerstone Missionary Baptist Church right here in San Francisco. He began his faith journey at a young age, later preaching his first sermon in 1993 and serving as a pastor in various churches throughout California. Currently, he, as I mentioned, is the pastor of Cornerstone Missionary Baptist Church and the president of California State Baptist Convention. And so I'd like to start off, welcome. I would like to start off our conversation by asking how you might have supported members of your church that have been affected by organ donation and transplantation.
First, I want to say thank you to Donor Network West for the work that they do and all the people affiliated with this wonderful organization. And thank you for having us to share our perspective from our faith and what we've witnessed as faith leaders. And so to answer your question, being supportive to an individual varies because people have different needs. And so you have to find out how they will allow you to help them. But the key is what I call a ministry of presence, that you have to be available and willing to be there when they need you most and encourage them and let them know that they're not alone. Because many times people think when tragedy, when sickness, when things happen, that they're all alone. And so to encourage them and let them know that they have a family that will be there, that will encourage them, but most of all will pray for them. And as a pastor and a person who believes in prayer, I don't believe prayer changes things, but prayer changes you in the things you're dealing with. And so it prepares you for what's going to happen next. And so all of us share a unique perspective because we've been able to see both sides of the table. We've been part of the families that have to say goodbye to a loved one. And then we've been on the other side where we see life restored, life extended, where people receive and have hope. And so our challenge today is to encourage people to make that selfless, courageous decision to check the box, to say yes, that I want to be able to, my last act on earth, give life to someone else, to help someone else. I have several members of my congregation who are kidney transplant recipients, lung transplant recipients, and just recently, one of our families has a son-in-law that received a heart. And I have a dear friend in Texas, good friend, Pastor Lee Nelson Jones, early 40s. He has a LVAD machine, and he's walking around with a machine that circulates the blood because his heart was too weak. And he said something to me. He said, in order for me to live, that means someone else has to die. And when I heard those words, it just kind of helped me to see the courageous, selfless sacrifice that a person makes in order to say that I'm willing to give what I have left, use what I have. And there's a scripture in the Bible that says, it's John chapter 15, verse 13. It says, greater love has no man than to lay down his life for a friend. And this is as close as we can get to laying down our lives to make sure that someone else can continue to live on, to prosper. And what I've also witnessed is those who have received organs have a newfound perspective on life. They go at it with a relentless passion to make their lives count, to do the best they can with what they have. And so as we are grateful to those who are organ donors, and we're grateful to those who serve our community and do the work, we also want to just say thank you to God for the technology, for the capability for people to partner with God and bring a real life miracle right into our presence. And so again, my perspective as a pastor is I've been there on both sides. I prayed with people and I've rejoiced with people. But I still want to encourage people to sign up to make sure that they do their part.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love that you brought up the donor registry. That's certainly something that we encourage all folks to consider. It allows you to make a legal designation of your desire to be a donor that we are prepared to help support. And for a faith community to support the registry, it's a tangible thing that people can do, as well as talking with their loved ones. So I appreciate you bringing that into the space with us, and also acknowledging that you have to hold space for the grief that comes. You know, we talk so much about the lives being saved, and while that is very central to the work that we do, we certainly, a big part of an equal measure is the support that we want to provide for families in grief, right? And that's a big part of your role as well. So thank you for calling that in today. Thank you so much. All right, and we're moving down to two gentlemen today who are going to share some of their perspectives. We have Kashif Abdullah. He's the head of the San Francisco Islamic School. He is currently serving as the head of school for San Francisco Islamic School. He has been an educator for 17 years and is currently serving a 3-year term on the San Francisco Interfaith Council, and he is joined by Dr. Shareef Syed, an associate professor of surgery in the Division of Transplantation at UCSF, again, here in the Bay Area. He performs living and deceased liver, kidney, and pancreas transplants in children and adults. He, aside from his busy clinical practice, his academic focus is surgical education, and he recently completed a master's in education at Berkeley and is the abdominal transplant surgery fellowship director and surgical director of the simulation lab. So training the next generation of surgeons, and he's also worked in many different countries, including Tanzania, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Korea, and many different elements of humanitarian work. So thank you both for being here to bring us this knowledge and passion. So.
Thank you so much for the introduction.
Of course.
And Pastor, thank you so much for that perspective. This is my first time being a part of a forum about this topic, so I'm learning as we go, kind of treading new waters on this journey. So super appreciative to the organization for allowing me to be here today and sharing. We've been asked to talk about the Islamic perspective on organ donation. I am not qualified to make a ruling on organization. I'm not a medical professional as my colleague, Dr. Syed. I'm a teacher. If you ask me about writing an essay or playing Foursquare, I'm really good at that. So when it comes to Islamic rulings, we have to refer to the organizations that are qualified to give rulings. So I'm referring to the Fiqh Council of North America, who partnered up with Islamic Medical Association of North America to create the ruling, to release the ruling. And you can look online, you can Google Fiqh Council of North America, organ donation, and then you can read in detail. I'll be summarizing quickly what the ruling says. First of all, organ donation in Islam, according to this ruling, is acceptable, okay, to receive and both to donate. It's actually an act of charity. According to Islamic tradition, charity can be anything from giving a smile to giving a monetary donation. So it's an act of charity, and we're always trying to, as a practicing Muslim, always trying to find ways to donate, always trying to give back. So this is one example of giving charity. My job as an educator, I teach young kids, older kids. My job as an educator is to receive this information and to educate the next generation on important topics as this. There are some conditions, and that's the conditions I'll be sharing with you from the council. The first condition is, if you are going to be a donor, you cannot sell an organ, okay? Unfortunately, there are situations in the world for those who need the money, they may be taken advantage of and given a little amount of money to support their family and asked to donate their organ unwillingly. So we are not allowed to sell our organs. Our body is a trust, and it's something that we cannot sell. We're also, if we're going to be a donor, we're not allowed to put ourselves in a situation where it's going to be harmful for us. I know you're going to have some stitches. I know you're going to maybe a couple of days off of work, but cannot be considerably harmful to the donor. So that's the second condition. Also, you have to have documented consent and authorization if you're going to donate. So if you do pass away and that consent or authorization was not documented before your passing, then your spouse or your loved ones cannot make that decision for you. So you, as the donor, have to make that decision yourself, and it has to be documented before. If you are going to donate a vital organ, this is where the gray area comes in a little bit. If you are going to donate a vital organ such as the heart, okay, according to this ruling, to donate a heart, that heart must be, I was told not to use the word harvested, recovered, right? Recovered after the time of death. And what does it mean to a death? What is the definition? It's going to vary from faith to faith. And the gray area is the brain death. So there's a difference of opinion on brain death. So this is a case-by-case basis. But for this ruling, we'll say cardiac termination of death, okay? The non-vital organs, like Dr. Syed, he's a kidney, liver, pancreas transplant. Those can be donated while living, and they can be donated to and Dr. Syed can clarify anything that I messed up. Brother, you can take care of that, right? That's why I'm sitting to my left. All right, I do want to mention one thing to put things in perspective. When we look at the world today, a lot of things are going on politically. Liberties, rights have been at risk, loss of life, especially amongst children. And sometimes, some moments, for some of us, we feel that, oh, humanity may be at a loss, or there's no hope. Just for a moment, maybe. It may feel like that. And I wanted to mention one verse from the Quran. You can look this up as well. Chapter 5, verse 32. That resonates in this chapel. I've been in this chapel plenty of times before, and I'll be here again for Thanksgiving. But can resonate today, it's relevant today. And that is, whoever kills an innocent soul, it is as though he has killed all of humanity. And whoever saves an innocent soul, it is as though he has saved all of humanity. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about what we're doing today, and you think about the donation, the intent of a donor to save a life, and we think about maybe sometimes we are at a loss of humanity, being here today, and the donor does not know who it's going to go to necessarily. Sometimes they do, a lot of times they don't. Their love is indiscriminate. They don't know if it's going to go to a child, to an elderly patient, to a Muslim, to a Christian, to a Jew, to a Buddhist, some of faith, of no faith. That love is indiscriminate, and it gives hope to humanity. So I wanted to ask everyone today, in our own different ways, I pray that all of us can be that spark for humanity, and that we all work towards making this a better place for all of us. And thank you so much for the opportunity again. And I'm going to stop right there and give it to Dr. Syed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to be speaking as a transplant surgeon, but as a Muslim also. And I wanted to share my thoughts about this incredible miracle that I'm blessed to be a part of every day. I'm glad to be sharing this panel with people from different traditions, because medicine is an astonishing practice that unites us all, and it's based on a foundation that the human being is a sacred entity. We all value both the living and the deceased due to our belief that we are all creations of God. And medicine focuses on the care of the weak, the vulnerable, the ill, and also charity are themes that are threaded through all of our traditions. I'm not an Islamic scholar, but I hope to share my experience to help individuals who are considering donation. We as Muslims, as people in other faith, believe that our bodies are a trust from God, and this entrustment is something that we take seriously. During our lives, we're instructed to follow morals that benefit ourselves and others, our families and greater society. Some of these virtues include justice, honesty, integrity, gratitude, charity, forgiveness, patience. And we do things like pray and fast to try and help train us to do these things. But we're living in a practical world, and Islam is supposed to be a social faith. So how can we put these principles into practice? So Brother Kashif outlined that amongst Islamic scholars, living and deceased donation are permissible. However, the permissibility is a religious term. I feel like what I take part in is a miracle. It is a charity, it is a kindness and a patience in action. It's gratitude in action, and encompasses the best of humanity. As he mentioned, there are some stipulations regarding donations. However, safety is one. As a liver and a kidney and a pancreas surgeon, living donation has become a safe exercise. There are a few places in the world that are not performing living donor operations. And I can honestly say, based on my own experience, observing the devotion of transplant surgeons around the world, we take this responsibility seriously. We practice, we study, and we focus to be able to provide the best care to donors and not so for them to not experience any unnecessary harm. And with regard to deceased donation, at a time of high emotion and it's a difficult time for donor families, we want to show the utmost respect to the deceased. And we perform these procedures on the deceased with this respect in mind. Deceased donation operations are incredibly spiritual experiences for those participating in them. I know that my belief and spirituality has deepened as a part of being a part of these experiences. Being in the presence of an individual, the donor, who is willing to give without knowledge of who is going to receive and not expecting anything in return, exemplifies, the best of humanity and all Islamic principles. I can also speak for allocation policies in the United States. And though we can have all of these thoughts and principles, we want to be sure that when we are donating an organ, is my organ going to be used in a fair and equitable way? And I can speak for the American system being robustly monitored and highly regulated, which are in line with all faith-based values and Islamic values. It's based on who needs it in liver and in many other organs, but who needs it the most and who's been waiting the longest. And as discussed, money is not involved in the equation. And I'll end on talking about the benefits to individuals and society. I spend most of my life hearing about diseases that have changed the direction of an individual's life, how it's impacted their family and impacts communities. We all saw during COVID, disease does not discriminate for race, gender, age, or religion. In the same way, hypertension, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, infectious diseases, congenital issues impact adults and children of all faiths. Liver and kidney and pancreas transplant waiting lists are made up of people from all communities. And without donation, there is very little we can do to help cure their problems. With donation, on the other hand, the life of a child is transformed. Families can be reunited, Parents that are healthy can care for their children, and adults can work to contribute to society. Transplantation is transformative and has an incredible impact on fellow human beings. In Islam, there's a concept of sadaqah jariyah. It's a perpetual charity that can accumulate after someone has passed away. We usually think about this as teaching people good things, building a water well that can continue after you die, planting trees, etc. However, whether deceased or living, in my mind, there is nothing that demonstrates this charity better than organ donation. Modern medicine and discovery is allowing us to use organs more so than ever before, yet there is still an astonishing need. Therefore, I am an organ donor. I would encourage everyone, and specifically the Muslim community, to inform themselves about organ donation and hopefully reap the rewards of this most honorable act.
Oh, thank you. That was fascinating. I loved hearing about the Quran. I love to hear about your experience as a transplant surgeon, seeing lives impacted and improved, lives saved. So thank you both for sharing those perspectives. That was incredible. Okay, moving down our esteemed list here, we have our regional chaplain, Elder Robert Richardson. He has been in ministry for over 3.5 decades. He's an elder in his faith tradition. He's pastored many churches in Northern California, Patterson, Manteca, Modesto, just to name a few. And in the last decade and a half, he's focused solely on supporting the dying and their families, rendering care for them. So thank you for being here, Chaplain.
I am a hospice chaplain. I am an interfaith chaplain for hospice. And let me tell you what that entails. As a hospice chaplain, that means that someone has 6 months to live or less. And when you have 6 months to live or less, it means that you've had a conversation with a doctor. And that doctor has told you that there's no more that they can do. And they're going to do everything they can to make you comfortable. But when you're told or you hear there's nothing more we can do, oftentimes that's not true. What should be said to you oftentimes is there's nothing that your neighbor will do. Because we have many people on hospice that are dying of heart disease. We have people who are on hospice that are dying of renal failure. We have people on hospice who are dying of COPD. And just some of these diseases that I named could be alleviated by an organ transplant. So there's nothing more that the doctor can do. It's that your neighbor is not willing to do anything. And as a hospice chaplain, I have to deal with these patients who are dying and try to help them find hope, try to help them find answers, try to help them to find peace as they're grappling with the reality that they're on the clock and that time is ticking. And oftentimes, they can lose hope, they can lose faith, and they have lost more than just a life. And what lies in the aftermath is a family. That son that can no longer hug his mother. That young man that can no longer learn from his father. Oftentimes they're angry and they're mad at God. And all of this comes about because simply their neighbor would not step up. And what I mean by their neighbor would not step up, I can best summarize that by a story in the Bible. It's a story that I'm sure you've heard, regardless of your faith, tradition, or your religion. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. And in the story of the Good Samaritan, there's a man who is beat and robbed, and he's beaten and left for dead, and he's laying on the side of a road. And a priest comes by, and when he sees this man beaten and laying on the side of the road, he crosses the street and proceeds on the other side. And then another passerby comes by, and he sees the man and he sees the condition that he's in, and he too keeps walking and does nothing. And then finally, that Good Samaritan comes by, sees the man beaten down and sees his wounds, and he gives aid, and he binds his wounds, and he puts the man on his beast, and he takes him to an inn, and he stays with him, and he nurses him to health to the best of his ability. And then when this Good Samaritan has to leave, he pays the innkeeper money and says, take care of him. And if you run out of money, when I come back, I'll pay you. And when Jesus tells that story, he asks the question, who was that man's neighbor? Was it the first passerby? Was it the second passerby? Or was it the third passerby? And everybody says it was the third one, the one that gave aid. That was the real neighbor. Well, in organ donation, it's our job to be the Good Samaritan. It's our job to give aid. It's our job to see there's a need and to fill it. So when I get a call and someone needs to see the chaplain, maybe instead of them hearing, there's nothing more that we can do, they can hear, we've got some good news for you. Your neighbor is going to give you the tissues you need. Your neighbor is going to donate the kidney that you need. And they get a new chance at life. They get a new opportunity. And all it takes is us being a good neighbor. It's for us taking a second and asking the question, what can I do? Before I was born and before everybody on this panel was born, a question rang out. And that question was, am I my brother's keeper? Spoiler alert. Yes, you are. So I'm here today with this organization and these distinguished people to make a plea that you will simply be a good neighbor, that you won't pass by those that are in need. I know of no faith that doesn't speak about love, that doesn't speak about charity, that doesn't speak about giving. And I know of no faith that speaks on these principles and does not urge those that say they believe to put it in practice. If you want to be a good neighbor, you have to put that in practice. Because we know a tree by the fruit that it bears. Don't tell me you're a good neighbor if you're not being neighborly.
Oh, I love that. I love that, the neighbor, the concept of being a neighbor, and we're all interconnected. It seems like we've kind of heard some of that repeat throughout, and I love that that's a common thread that we're all sharing amongst our different communities. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was wonderful. And I know, I can tell that you've companioned many patients and families through those important moments at end of life. And it's integral to the work that we also do. And so thank you for that. Well, we're coming next to Miss Genevieve Navar Franklin. She's a spiritual care provider and storyteller. So I look forward to that. She's a judicial interpreter, law enforcement chaplain, and advisor to healthcare institutions with a background in ethics, cultural issues, and patient experience. So I can't wait to hear a story from you, maybe, Miss Genevieve, and tell us about your journey with organ donation and how it's impacted your life.
Thank you. I'll be speaking from my heart, but reading with my eyes. Good morning. In the words of 17th century clergyman John Bunyan, whom you'll remember perhaps from Pilgrim's Progress if you are from my generation or older, you have not lived today until you have done something for someone who cannot repay you. For many years, I've had the privilege of tending to my fellow human beings in moments ranging from despair to luminescence. In that work, I've discerned that the deepest lessons in loving and being come when we stand as hushed witnesses at the threshold between living and dying. During the 5 years when I served the Sonoma community as a law enforcement chaplain, I came to know well the meaning of their motto, being there. Such chaplains are called to minister to friends and families when there is an unexpected or unexplained death or life-threatening injury to which law enforcement responds. Accidents in vehicles, in boats, shootings, stabbings, suicides, sudden infant death, and others. As they come to terms with the loss or impending loss of their loved ones, the question often arises, what shall we do once the spirit has left the body? For some, the answer is clear. The wishes of the deceased cannot be doubted. But for others, this is not the case, and at times, all hell breaks loose among those loved ones, as grief makes poor mortals seek some stability in doctrine or deed. Ironically, these traumas, more than many other deaths, often bear a redemptive factor, for in those cases, the loved one can live on by restoring life to others. That is when chaplains become servant observers in the hope that grace will illumine the course that is to be taken. But if I were to be asked, I would share my deep belief that fundamentally, most religions and philosophies point to this. Right beliefs should lead to right actions that flow from a right heart. As writer Clarence L. Haynes Jr. said, you truly cannot have one without the other. But I'd especially draw on the philosopher extraordinaire, Dag Hammarskjöld, Secretary General of the United Nations from 1953 to 1961. In the case of deceased donors, I believe he would say, seek the road which makes death a fulfillment. And for living donations, he would say, we are not permitted to choose the frame of our destiny, but what we put into it is ours. And so to my stories. A gift received becomes a gift that is given in turn. In a matter of hours, we will be graced by a full beaver moon here, the last supermoon of the year. The full moon prized by sailors for raising tides, illuminating danger, lifting the spirits of the darkened soul. The full moon, a constant and compassionate companion. When I met my husband, Don, I was drawn by his love of the full moon. It was a fascination that I shared, and I helped him mark the phases of the moon regularly. Don was born 74 years ago today in Omaha, Nebraska. 11 years later, precisely on the 15th of November, he spent his birthday in the hospital, where a doctor curtly informed his fretting parents that their promising boy had juvenile diabetes. Over the years, Don became intimately familiar with the ravages of his disease. The most traumatic of all was retinal bleeding, commencing when he was a young man on yet another November. It ultimately took away his sight altogether. We met 10 years later. A walk together in Golden Gate Park was all it had taken for me to recognize that Don would be my companion for a lifetime. Our strengths and weaknesses balanced each other. He was my rudder, and I was his sail. Don was witty, bright, and sensitive, considerate and honest. So when on another walk several weeks later, I found him troubled and silent, I could tell he was struggling with something he dreaded to reveal. Finally, he whispered falteringly, "Jen, I'm in end-stage renal failure." Within a few months, what little kidney function Don had left declined, and he began the torture of dialysis. We, however, were among the fortunate few. Soon after his siblings were tested for compatibility, his older brother's kidney was tucked in below Don's rib cage, and as the surgeon quipped, it pinked up and peed. We were infinitely grateful for this reprieve from a sentence that tens of thousands wait for. Thus, we journeyed under many more full moons together. It grew to represent a bond between us and gave us comfort through trying times. We made it a point to go out under its benevolent light. He would sometimes say, wait, let me see, is it over there? And I'd say, no, that's a street light. But the moon is bright tonight. It's even brighter than that light. And then I'd take his hand and say, it's actually over there. But no ship sails forever. Though Don had taken great care of his gifted kidney, the time came when we lay at final port in comfort care as Don's spirit tugged at his body's moorings. After 3 sleepless nights in the hospital, I woke up with a feeling of renewal and threw open the picture window's curtains to let in the light. Filling the space in broad daylight, gazing back at me in all tranquility, was the gossamer orb of the moon. 12 hours later, it was 10 years ago last week, on a full moon night like this very night, Don breathed his last. I remained in the hospital waiting to receive a call from the National Donate Life Registry. After what seemed like an eternity, since his body had been taken to await approval for organ retrieving process, no longer harvesting, thank God, the phone rang, and I proceeded to answer endless detailed questions about his health history. By the time we were done, I had little hope that the vessel that had been his disease-ravaged body would fulfill our dreams of leaving a life legacy to someone else. But at least we would have tried. With a sigh and a final click of the hospital phone, I silently gathered up the piles of sundry items that one accumulates on such vigils, walked to the empty parking lot, and slowly drove away. From above, the full moon's silvery streams of soft blue light guided me home on the first of so many sailing nights to come without the captain of my ship. Some days later, I received a letter confirming my doubts that his organs would not be viable for transplantation. But the letter, curiously, had not come from the National Registry, but from an organization called Sight Life. After words of sympathy and cordial regrets, I was at first puzzled to read an expression of deep-felt gratitude, and then a final revelatory explanation for the thanks. For despite everything, one of Don's corneas, from my Don, who had struggled so much to bear the loss of his own sight, that one delicate lens, had weathered the storms of his life to restore vision to a stranger through his priceless and enduring gift. The blind gave sight to the blind. Paying it forward 2022. In gratitude and to recognize my 70th birthday, I undertook the process of altruistic non-designated kidney donation. I was thrilled to find that my lab tests were good and set up an appointment at UCSF as soon as I could after I had had a routine mammogram. But the best laid plans oft go awry. I was called back for a second imaging, and the biopsy revealed stage 1 breast cancer. I didn't so much feel fear and anguish over the new diagnosis as I felt disappointment and discouragement at what this signified for my journey to organ donation. One has to wait a full 5 years before applying again. In that period, 25,000 people will have died waiting for a kidney. When November 2027 rolls around, though, I plan to be ready. God willing, inshallah, Dios mediante, I will be approved to give my spare. Maybe the moon will be full. Thank you for listening to my stories and for all the good work that you do. When you go home tonight, look up into the sky. In a matter of hours, we'll be graced by a full beaver moon, the last supermoon of the year. The full moon prized by sailors for raising tides, illuminating danger, lifting the spirits of the darkened soul. The full moon, a constant and compassionate companion.
Thank you, Genevieve. Oh, you have us over here crying. I can see you're very good at the storytelling aspect, but boy, we are moved by your husband's gifts and your full heart to do something similar. That is an incredible story, and thank you for sharing it today and bringing that personal perspective to our panel. So thank you. We've come to Rabbi Lisa Kingston. Hopefully you're not crying over there in the corner like us on this side. Lisa graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Skidmore College and was ordained as a rabbi from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 2013. She aims to strengthen the community connections and foster new partnerships on the peninsula at Peninsula Temple Beth El. Thank you for being here, Rabbi. Let me ask you, can you share the Jewish practices and perspective regarding saving a life?
Sure. But I just want to say it is really an honor to follow everyone who spoke, and feeling a little intimidated by everyone's incredible insight and passion. And also to share, before I answer your question, that I was first introduced to Donor Network West through one of my congregants. Our past temple president, Roxanne Cohen, found herself in that situation that many people do, of tragedy, of learning that her brother had been declared brain dead after a sailing accident, and had that opportunity to, in that moment of shock and grief, decide that her brother's death did not have to end in tragedy. And she was able to donate his organs through Donor Network West, and then connected me, the rabbi of her congregation, to the organization. And one of the reasons why it is so important that Jewish traditions are shared is because what you'll hear is actually me listing all of the reasons why it seems that organ donation would not align with Jewish practices. However, as especially our Islamic partners were speaking of, there are so many similarities in our religious values, and even in the sacred texts that you shared. We have a saying from our Talmud that says, to save a life is to save an entire world. To take a life is to take an entire world. It is almost word for word, Kashif, what you shared. So this value in Judaism is called pikuach nefesh, the value of saving a life. And it originates in our book of Deuteronomy, where we read, God places before us life and death. Choose life. So again, the real question, if life is the utmost value of what it means to be Jewish, of honoring life, of preserving life, of giving life, then why isn't organ donation just an obvious extension of that commitment to life? So we have to go back to the book of Genesis, where we find our narrative of creation. And the first answer is that Jews believe we were created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and that God creates us in perfect bodies exactly as we are meant to be, in whatever that is that our bodies are. At the same time, we know that our bodies are imperfect and they break down. So what does it mean to then pursue actions or interventions that change our body? And we have an idea that Jews should not undergo any extensive medical interventions. That's not to say that we can't have surgeries or medical practices. It tends to be interpreted more as the rejection of tattoos, the rejection of piercings, the rejection of optional surgeries. But again, there's a very delicate balance. Once you start trying to differentiate between what is essential and what is non-essential, the line can get pretty blurry and pretty complicated. The next component of Judaism that really has prevented Jews from embracing organ donation relates to our burial practices. That extension of honoring and caring for the body as a gift of God persuades Jews to bury the body as immediately as we can, with as little intervention as we can. So Jews do not traditionally become embalmed. We do not cremate our bodies. We do not even perform autopsies on our bodies. We simply try to bury our body whole and quickly. And some of the practices that happen before a Jewish body becomes buried is a ritual called tahara, where that body is washed and clean and cared for and not even left alone between the time of death to the moment of burial. So again, this idea of something, any procedure or practice that might tamper with the body was something that for a really long time was seen as just in opposition to Jewish practice and Jewish law. Finally, there is a belief in the understanding of Jewish afterlife called Techiyat HaMetim, literally referring to the resurrection of the dead. As we believe that a Messiah has not yet come, we are awaiting a period of redemption where some Jewish practices or some Jewish perspectives believe that there will be a resurrection of the body, and that in order for that messianic resurrection to occur, we would need our entire bodies. So let's say that someone did have to have any sort of surgery, a necessary surgery like an amputation. Sometimes that is even that if there's an ability to bury with a body part, you would do that. And I'm also referring to sort of the most traditional practices of Judaism, and I want to share that I come from the branch of Judaism called Reform Judaism, the Reform movement. And the way that I understand and interpret Jewish law really is on the left of the spectrum of Jewish practices. Which brings me back to organ donation. So if, as Jews, we are not necessarily committed to that exact letter of the law of Jewish practice, then how do we let the values supersede the practice? And this goes back to this idea of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, and the belief that choosing life and putting life first is the best the best way that we can partner with God to make this world a better place. There is an understanding of this practice that you can really bring into your everyday life, meaning weighing every decision where is this going to bring about more life? Is this decision going to bring about more goodness, or is it going to lead to danger or destruction? An example would be on Shabbat, the Jewish day of rest. We're told that we can't use certain technologies or work. So what if someone is having a medical crisis on Shabbat? Would you pick up the phone to call an ambulance and send that person to the hospital? Would you drive to the doctor and get that person attention? The answer would be, of course. If you're faced with a crisis of life in front of you, you would, I like what you said, follow your heart and do the right thing. So why wouldn't you do that in death? And there's really no other guiding value than just this idea that we can save a life. We can do an act of charity that we call tzedakah, that we can do a final act of giving that no one is repaying us for. Again, themes that were repeated throughout this panel. And that our Jewish practice has really, our Jewish traditions have really been pushing the idea of organ donation through writing, through study, through a form called responsa, through rabbinic reinterpretation of the law. And even in Orthodox Judaism now, there's a special organ donation card that Orthodox Jews can sign that are under the auspices of an Orthodox rabbinate, so that very religious Jews can get that special permission from their rabbi. So organ donation is not just something that is now common in the liberal Jewish movement, but it's something that really expands through the branches of Judaism, and that I'm hoping that by speaking about, again, more Jews can understand why this is so important, why this is really an act of Jewish practice and Jewish faith and Jewish law, and not something that goes against it.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting some of the maybe aspects of different faiths that might seem in contradiction with donation, and maybe how we can reconsider those, and maybe through more conversation kind of look at the bigger picture of what it means to save a life. So thank you so much. You've all shared quite a bit today on the panel, and we have a lot of folks here in the room with us and virtually that probably have some questions and maybe want to have more clarity and insight about some of your comments today. And so I want to encourage those of you out in the virtual world to submit questions to us that we can share with our panel and have some further conversations with things that might have come up for you while listening. I'm certainly happy to answer questions about the donation process as well, if I haven't already shared that, because there's certainly a lot of questions about that might have come up for you while listening today. So put those in the chat and we'll get those questions to our panel. And I have a few questions to start off with until maybe some of them come in virtually. And please do raise your hand if you in the group have a question that you would like to address to our speakers. So, okay, where shall I begin? This is where I come in my Oprah moment, right? And we can kind of go through, and if you have a specific perspective that you want to share, just let me know. In what ways do you think our community, in what ways can our religious community support and encourage individuals to consider donation as a means of helping others in need? If you had someone in your faith come to you and say, I'm really struggling with this decision, what might you share with them? And if there's anything specific from religious texts that you might bring into the conversation, I would love to hear about that as well. Do you have any thoughts, Reverend? Not to put anyone on the spot.
In the African American community, there are some narratives that tend to scare people away, that if you're on the donor list, that the doctors won't work hard to save your life because there's a bigger picture of, you know, doing the transplants. And so we have to make sure that that is understood, that that's not the truth, that doctors will do all they can to preserve your life, save your life. And if not, the next thing that can happen to really add significance to a well-lived life is to give life after death. African Americans are roughly about 30% of those on the donor list, and we also have to find preventative measures. We try to really promote healthy lifestyles, diets, exercise, and things of that nature to prevent diabetes and high blood pressure that puts a lot of our community on the donor list. But if someone is asking, should I or should I not, I would encourage them, but that's a decision that they have to be comfortable making, and then have that conversation with their family so that they know that if it comes to that, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you brought up myths that exist out in the community, right? That's, I think, something that we struggle with even outside of the faith community, which is that there are fears that the general public has about donation. And sometimes speaking with their faith leaders is the most reassuring thing that can bring them peace when making, considering that. And certainly that's something that our community engagement team really tries to promote out in the general public, which is that you absolutely, every effort is made to save your life, and every measure of medical technology is exhausted before donation is even a consideration that might be possible. So that, I think, is a very important thing that you brought up. Did any of you have a comment on this particular question in terms of faith-based texts or conversations that you might have with somebody in your community if they're struggling with that decision about donation? Yes, go ahead, Pastor.
For me, the thing to do.
Oh, microphone.
Sorry about that. I think the thing for me is I want to attack it while people are alive and healthy. When we have to pose the conversation when your brother or sister is in ICU and they're dying, and we have to bring up organ donation, those family members have so much going on at that time, so many worries. They can't hear everything. They can't think straight. So to broach the subject then, when it's normally broached, it's hard to receive and transmit information when we're in trauma. Also, for the person that gets a diagnosis of cancer or some kind of disease diagnosis, and then to ask them when they're in trauma and they're trying to process isn't the best time. But we can broach the subject when we're healthy, when we're alive, when we're not at the DMV.
That's right.
And talk about the importance of giving, the importance of charity, that what you're doing might save your brother's life, your neighbor's life, a stranger's life. And I think it's all about the timing of it. I don't want my wife to tell me she's pregnant when she's 4 months pregnant. I need to get the information a little bit earlier. And if we can get people to make a decision and get the information a little bit earlier, I think that would be good. So we can start to be aggressive in how we share the information to the people when they're in health. So for me as a religious leader, I want to do it in the pulpit. As a doctor, I want to do it doing regular exams. As a neighbor, I want to do it at community events, to do it proactively and not reactively, and see if that changes the numbers.
I love that. I love that perspective of not waiting, because you're so right. Nobody's in a great state of mind when they have an unexpected crisis or even an expected crisis, right? So you want to have those conversations with acknowledgement that they're hard to have, right? We're kind of in the Western Hemisphere, we don't like to talk about death. We don't like to acknowledge those difficult topics, but hopefully the consideration of donation and the life that can go on brings some measure of comfort to those conversations that people feel afraid to have or reluctant. Like I said, I've been in this field for 20 years, and I find it very hard to talk to my loved ones, not so much about donation, but just about hard end-of-life topics. And I think that that's probably common for a lot of those in the faith community as well. You feel that spiritual connection, but it doesn't always mean those conversations are that much easier. So great point. Great point.
I wanted to add, in lieu of what Elder Richardson said, that Donor Network West has partnered for the past 17 years under the direction of June Wallace with the San Francisco Baptist Ministers Conference, and has had a seat at the table for our citywide revival, and has done presentations for the last 17 years to make people aware of why and how they can be a donor and things of that. And I know several people that attended that ended up receiving transplants, and more people have. I don't know the final numbers, but we pray that it is effective and having an impact, that people are signing up to be donors. But we've been doing a part of that with our conference and with Donor Network West for the last 17 years.
We love to be part of it. Yes, yes. Genevieve, please.
As you spoke, I was thinking about the fact that we just went through the Triduum of All Souls Day, All Saints Day, and so forth. And so I was thinking on my cultural tradition, which is from Mexico, and one of the things that I've encountered is that there is a lot of mixing of elements together, which is very classic description of this culture that I come from. And so you have a fatalistic aspect to the society, you have an authoritarian, you have mystical, and so things get all jumbled up. And when death comes knocking at the door, despite the fact that, the day of the day that in Mexico shows that there's not too much squeamishness over the subject, at least not as one can perceive. But what happens is that when that moment comes, as you were saying, it's too late to have the conversations that will sort out what is really fundamental here. And when I speak as an advisor to healthcare providers, I sometimes ask them to look at a situation and ask themselves, what do you fear? And also ask themselves, what do you love?
I love that. That's great. Okay, we have another question. Are there any questions out here? I don't want to leave anybody out. I do have my list here, but if you have some, throw a hand up. Okay, what are some cultural or personal barriers that might prevent people from considering organ donation as it relates to their faith? I think you've talked about some of them. Do any of you have a contribution to that thought? Yes.
Just want to point out, my sister was mentioning earlier, it's very much in line for the Islamic tradition about body mutilation, burying the body as soon as possible. And I think there's some stigma associated with that may lead up to being hesitant about being open to organ donation. And education here is the key. Like I said, this is my first time being a part of this kind of discussion. I know Dr. Syed for years. I haven't had this level of conversation with him until this recently. His son actually gave me a presentation on how to do a kidney transplant in first grade.
Oh.
I'm serious. So I'm just, it's education and becoming aware. I believe that, it's for many communities, I'm saying for my community, I don't think it's, and maybe Dr. Shareef can talk about this later on, how we can bring this topic to the community and speak about it from the spiritual perspective. And yeah, and challenging, not challenging, but educating, so we don't have that stigma attached to organ donation. So again, this is a learning experience for myself, and I'm just grateful to be here and learn from everybody, different perspectives. And I believe now I have some work to do after this.
Oh, I love to hear that. I love to hear that you're inspired to go back.
No, and I just wanted to share that exactly what the event is for is community outreach. You know, a lot of people are unaware of the disease burden of kidney disease, the disease burden of heart problems, and how it's impacting all of our communities. So understanding that there is a huge need, and as putting my doctor hat on, or the Donor Network West hat on, it is in our we have to act according to the highest ethical standards and push for the best outcomes. And I can speak for what I've experienced, but there's always more that we can do. There's always, relaying what our practices are on the medical side to the public to make sure that there's a trusting relationship between the public and the medical aspect of this. And usually faith will be slower to kind of take on some of these advances, and it's for us to interact with the faith community to inform them of these advances, of the ethical principles that we work by, to then go back and review the scriptures and to come out with rulings that can help the congregations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. It brings a question to me. This is kind of maybe off the grid, but I'm going to ask. Many of the obviously religious texts and things and belief systems go back thousands and thousands of years, right? And organ donation is a relatively young field by all accounts when it comes to medical treatment. And the technology, even in the last 2 decades, has been, leaps and bounds and amazing ways to save a life. How do we bridge some of the gap of understanding that I think you're pointing out about what older texts say, or something that was from original thought about a particular faith, and catch them up? I don't know if I'm asking clearly, but I'm curious about that.
Can I just because Judaism is a religion that does this all the time, that our tradition is a living tradition where we're constantly applying questions about contemporary life in line with sacred text, and the process that I mentioned called responsa, the idea of asking a question to a rabbinic authority and then coming up with an answer, is constantly creating new ways to practice Judaism. So we have responsa already being written about the ethics of using electric cars or AI. So again, our rabbis are addressing this technology in relationship to our sacred texts. So it is more about the preaching and the sharing and the teaching than it is about whether or not our texts have something to say. I think that any person of a faith background that is rooted in a textual tradition will understand that we are always looking towards text for contemporary, towards contemporary life.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
What I was going to say is that most religions, they change and they evolve in time. So, for example, many Western religions had a policy of no cremation. But over time, that has evolved, and they have embraced cremation. So the cremation rates in 2024 look vastly different than they did in the 20s and the 40s and 50s as religions have evolved. And most modern religions, they have councils that meet yearly or yearly, and they will change the laws. They will change the precepts of that religion. What happens is the membership doesn't know what their religion practices. So you can be maybe a Baptist or Pentecostal or any religion, and you could be in your 80s, and you'd be like, when I die, I have to get buried. My religion talks about no cremation. Actually, no. That's not what your religion teaches. They changed that back in the 40s or the 50s, but they're just not aware. So it's really, the onus is on the religious leaders to let people know what their religion is practicing and how it's evolving. During COVID, for example, religion got rewritten because in my faith tradition, it says, do not forsake the assembly of yourselves together. Then COVID hit, and we forsook the assembly of ourselves together because it wasn't wise, and we, used technology, whether it was church online or drive-through churches or churches on streaming service. We did that because the necessity dictated it.
Yes.
We had a religion during COVID where we would hug and embrace our brothers at church. You would walk into church and we would hug you and we would embrace you. COVID changed that. So as we're in 2024, embracing 2025, we have to also adopt with what's going on and embrace organ donation. It's not so much we need to rewrite the text. We need to be able to practice homileutics and hermeneutics and rightly be able to divide the text.
It's so interesting that our conversation has evolved to include kind of what happened during COVID and how we were seeing end-of-life processes change through that period of time. Families couldn't gather at bedside to say their goodbyes. Those were really painful times, and it extended to funeral arrangements. And often the general public has concerns that there might be impact to those funeral arrangements if someone were to become a donor. And so it seems like a good time to say that organ donation and tissue donation does not impact the viewing opportunities or visitation opportunities that families may choose to pursue. But that is something that we work very closely with funeral home partners because they hold such importance in different faith communities and cultural traditions of saying goodbye to someone, right? So that's a very important piece that I think in sort of a tangential way, we work very closely with those entities as well. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's a big consideration for many families that we're talking to, is that they are thinking of those traditions that will help to bring them peace and closure, which is separate from donation and just as important, if not, more important to some different groups. So I'm glad you brought that up. So, okay, some more questions have come in. Why do you think so many individuals believe that their faith prohibits donation? Have you had any conversations about maybe misperceptions or assumptions that people are making? I think it kind of dovetails off of some of the conversations that we've already had. What have you maybe heard from people surrounding donation in your communities that maybe you've had to redirect some of that conversation?
I would say that donation or end of life and burial is the norm without donation. And so when you are deviating from the norm, the easiest option is to just do what everyone normally does. This is not a faith-based answer, but just a human nature aspect where we will just do what our grandmother did or our grandfather and our forefathers did. And sometimes these traditions are culturally based, not necessarily faith-based, or just based out of non-faith tradition. And so to then make a stand to say, I'm going to do something different than anyone else, is a lot harder, especially in the moment of grief. And so some of these strategies that we've spoken about, thinking about this ahead of time, obtaining consent, thinking about organ donation before one gets to that stage is important, but the majority of people probably aren't. And so at that time, it is an incredibly difficult decision to make. And, hopefully through educational opportunities, through faith-based engagement, through sessions like this, the public will become informed. But it will always be difficult to go against what has normally been done, and it takes extremely strong individuals to take that chance or take that stance to help someone else and to be able to see that through the grief. So that's why it's such an incredible privilege to kind of be a part of that, to witness all of these individuals that take that decision. But I don't. I wish that more people would know the benefits of it.
A follow-up question for you, Dr. Syed. Do you find that when you're talking with patients who are on the wait list, that maybe their families, what is the reaction of their families for people that may have not been predisposed to donation? Do they struggle at all with the treatment plan, which is, transplant is necessary if it's new to them? Have you encountered any of that in taking care of your patient population?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing is, relatively new as a concept to society. And so, throughout the process of being listed, throughout the process of being unwell, most of our time is spent in education to the patient, education to their family, and understanding the processes around transplant. And it takes a lot of time, even if you are in need, to understand that this is an entity, this is a potential cure for you, and this is a pathway for you. And so for both deceased donation and living donation, much of our time is spent in education to the recipients, let alone to somebody out in the world who hasn't ever thought about this, to be faced with that question at the end.
Absolutely. I find so much of our conversations with donor families or with families who are in the position of making that decision can be around the generational differences. We'll talk to the younger people in the family who might be the decision makers, and they say, we're very comfortable, we would love to do this, we would love to make this possible, but our our elders are not where we are in terms of their comfort and understanding. So I think you've brought up, in previous comments a bit about that too, is that it's not just the donor making the decision, it's all the people around them that might weigh in with their set of values or their generational perspectives on it, in addition to the faith aspect. Pastor, you got comments?
Yeah, I would say that sometimes to get a different answer, we have to change the question. And what I mean by that, one of the things that we can do, think when your mother dies or your father dies or a family member dies, we almost never go in their closet and throw all their stuff away. What we do is we go in their closet and we're like, oh, this winter jacket, I can give this to my neighbor, I can give it to Steve, or I can give it to Alice, because we don't want it to go to waste. And we see some belts. Oh, I'm not throwing these belts away. I can give it to a homeless shelter, and that can benefit some people that need some clothes. And we will go through the closet, and we will donate and give away their clothes, not thinking that we could have given something that would have made a legacy difference. that we could have given a much longer lasting donation. And if we won't throw grandma's coat away, and if we won't throw away our father's vest, why did we just bury so many precious things in the ground? So I think by reshaping and reframing the question, we can often get a different outcome, just about reframing it.
I love that visual. I mean, it's simple, but it's so resonant, I think, for all of us, is that intention of cherishing everything about our loved one and maybe not thinking that donation is another way to do that. I love that. Did you have a thought, Rabbi? Okay.
I think just changing stigmas, right?
Yes.
And the power of storytelling. And Genevieve, again, you just spoke so beautifully about your story. But the more we allow people to share those stories, and the more ways that we can share them. So if we are officiating over a funeral of someone who decided to donate their organs, make sure that we're saying that as part of their eulogies. Make sure that if someone receives an organ in your community, that they can share their testimony with the congregation, give them a platform, because the more that these stories become familiar, the more that our community's minds will change.
I love that. And that makes those who are waiting feel less alone. It makes them feel seen. The conversations are happening and the hope is there and it's being generated and moving forward. And those who have given also feel that sense of community as well, that others are making that decision and celebrating, their loved one. We at Donor Network have a donor family ceremony every year where we honor the previous year's donors, and folks can gather and we read different passages, we have speakers, and we acknowledge that ultimate gift and give those who have made that decision or honored their loved one's decision an opportunity to gather and kind of be together in that space. It isn't necessarily, it's not faith-based per se, but it has that feel of community coming together. So it feels like it's just, aligned with a lot of the work that you're doing in your day-to-day. So, Genevieve?
I think that in a realistic way, sometimes we transfer onto our loved one what we think we would feel. I mean, you're asking me to give grandma's skin. Oh my God, I don't want to have my skin taken off my body. But I think that the question that we often don't ask, and this is for not necessarily religious people, it's for all of us, is who is it that we love? What is it about them that we love? And where does that go? And so my father at one point had a quintuple bypass. And when I came home from having visited him briefly, I committed basically that I wouldn't take him for granted. We don't really take them for granted, but that I would begin to imagine where he would be when he was no longer with me in the physical body. And it was a practice that was so helpful. He outlived his bypass by 15 more years and died in his 90s. But I always wanted to say, you're in my heart.
I like that. I like that so much. I think one of the things that I want to touch on, if we haven't covered it to some extent, is the rare and unique opportunity to donate, right? We're talking about it today. It's what we live here in our world. It's touched each of you. Some of it is your profession. And I don't know that the general public knows that only 1% of deaths of anyone can be an organ donor. There's much more of an opportunity for tissue donation. As you pointed out, your husband was a corneal donor, restored sight to someone, which is an incredible gift. So tissue as well is something that I think the general public may not have that same awareness of, and that can be brought into focus because tissue donation can touch up to 75 people, while organ donation, immediately life transforming, saves the life of up to 8 people through one donor. But tissue donation can touch up to 75 people through sight, heart valves for heart valve donation, vascular tissue, bone grafts, skin grafts for burn survivors. So I think in addition to spreading awareness about organ donation for us and for the families who've lost someone, donation is donation. It's that intentional gift and generosity in those worst moments of knowing that there's something about your loved one or you that can help someone else. So I want to make sure to bring light to tissue donation being an incredible gift in addition to organ donation. And many, many more people might have the opportunity to be tissue donors, but if we don't bring that into the conversation, right? There may not be that awareness, and that can be something that, again, people will receive a call after their loved one has passed away if their loved one is a donor candidate. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
May I add a postscript?
Yes.
I had a mastectomy and originally had reconstruction, which I had undone. But what I learned in the process is that they actually use tissue.
Donor tissue.
support
You're a
it.
recipient as well as
Now,
a donor family.
1 in 8 American women are likely to encounter breast cancer in their lifetime. So just imagine how many women you can touch. And also some men have breast cancer as well.
Yeah.
But thank you for bringing that up,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
my understanding is then that even though as you said, Don's organs couldn't be used, but there was a lot that might have been able to
That's
be used.
right.
In his case, his cornea.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's compelling. Organ donation stories are so compelling. They're so immediately life-saving. People who need an organ transplant can be truly critically ill, right? So there's that element of immediacy to it. And for tissue donation, the broader impact of that, and even research programs. We're involved at Donor Network in many different research programs which allow progress when it comes to transplantation or curing different diseases. And some of those gifts come from someone who's made that decision, and maybe their organs or tissues could not be used for that immediate gift, but are a gift that will reach generations with the knowledge that they provide. So we've covered a lot today. We've really covered a lot today. I appreciate everybody being here, taking time out of your day. I know that out in the virtual space, there are many different areas of the state listening in, tuning in. I hope that all of you will bring back to your faith community or those you're taking care of, some of the concepts that we've talked about today. And to close us out, I'd like to invite Rabbi Lisa to close us out with a prayer. Yes, Rabbi.
Well, in gratitude, I want to invoke God of all generations, God of all faiths. Thank you for bringing all of this wisdom, all of this compassion, all of this life and love into this room this morning and online. Thank you for hearing our word. Thank you for hearing our plea. Thank you for allowing your word to translate into the values that we hold so dear, those values of giving, those values of life, those values of love. I'd like to ask that the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts were acceptable to you today. And I want to thank everyone for coming. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. That was lovely. Lovely way to close our day. And I want to end as well with some final thoughts and encourage all of you to register for organ and tissue donation. You can register through our website, donornetworkwest.org, and bring this discussion back again to your loved ones. Think about it yourself. And we encourage you, if you'd like to participate in next year's Donor Sabbath, to reach out to us. And finally, there is a QR code available to scan, and the password is One Voice, One Vision. One voice, one vision. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you well in the coming season.